On a quiet Friday night, single father Jonas Vale silenced his buzzing phone and turned back to his daughter, Ariana, who was lost in her coloring. The last thing he expected was a desperate message from the one woman who made his days miserable, Clara Hensley, his cold, unforgiving boss. 30 minutes later, she stood at his door, drunk, shattered, and barely standing. What Jonas didn't see was the dark figure across the street, watching every move. One choice, one moment of mercy. By morning, nothing would ever be the same. Jonas Vale's life ran on quiet sacrifice, alarm clocks before dawn, burnt coffee, and the gentle patience it took to raise 6-year-old Ariana alone. He worked longer hours than anyone on his team and spoke the fewest words. Appreciation had never followed him home. Neither had the promotions that Clara Hensley handed out like rewards to louder, less deserving M.E.N.T.O. Jonas. She was ice in human form. Precise. Untouchable. She never raised her voice, never smiled. Her eyes were always fixed on numbers, deadlines, and standards Jonas could barely meet no matter how hard he tried. For 3 years, she had been the villain of his days, the name that tightened his chest every morning when he swiped his badge at the door. That night, after Ariana fell asleep clutching her crayon-smeared drawings, his phone buzzed. Once, twice, then a message appeared. "Can you come get me?" "Please." The sender froze him in place. "Clara." Jonas stared at the wall, listening to the hum of the old refrigerator. His first instinct was anger. After everything, why me? But a softer voice echoed in his memory, his grandmother's warm whisper from long ago. Kindness is the kind of strength God doesn't ignore. Child point 30 minutes later. He stood outside a dim bar, the smell of liquor and rain mixing in the air. He spotted her near the entrance, slumped, mascara streaked, keys sliding from trembling fingers. Clara, powerful, polished, feared, looked impossibly small. "You shouldn't be here," she murmured as he steadied her. "Neither should you," he replied. For a moment, their eyes met. Behind the fog of alcohol and exhaustion, Jonas saw something unfamiliar in her expression. Fear. Not the calculated kind, the human kind. Across the street, unnoticed in the shadows, a figure stood still, watching. Jonas helped her into the passenger seat without another word. He didn't do it for her status or apology that never came. He did it because despite everything she had done, she was still just another broken soul. And for one mysterious, aching reason, she had chosen him to save her. Clara's apartment was nothing like Jonas had imagined. He'd expected something warm, expensive, maybe even beautiful, a reflection of the flawless, intimidating woman she presented to the world every day. Instead, when he helped her inside, the space felt cold and untouched, like a hotel room meant only for sleeping, not living. Sharp corners, white walls, minimal furniture, no laughter trapped in its walls, no memories on display, just silence. Jonas eased her onto the couch. She didn't protest. Her eyes wandered across the ceiling as if she were a stranger in her own home. "You can go," she murmured, her voice thin now. Stripped of authority, he glanced around. "And leave you like this." A faint, almost bitter huff of air left her lips. "You owe me nothing, Jonas." The way she said his name was different tonight. Softer, human. "I'm not doing this because I owe you anything," he said quietly. "I'm doing it because you needed someone." She turned her face away. "I never need anyone." He didn't argue. He simply walked into the kitchen, a space just as lifeless, and filled a glass with water. When he returned, he noticed something he'd missed before, that a single framed photograph sat on a small table near the window. It stopped him. Clara, much younger, hair loose, eyes crinkled with a smile he had never seen before, and beside her, a woman who looked so much like her, yet softer, warmer. Her arm was wrapped around the girl's shoulders as though trying to hold her forever. "Your mother?" Jonas asked gently. That Clara's fingers curled into the cushion. "She died 3 years ago," she said simply. The same year everything about her had changed. Cancer. Sudden. Relentless. The words spilled out in fragments. She had been the only family she had left. No father, no siblings. When the hospital room went silent for the final time, Clara swore she would never feel that helpless again. She built walls from ambition, from power, from control. She learned that if she stayed cold, stayed sharp, no one could ever break her like that again. But control came with a cost. I watched her fade, Clara whispered, eyes now filled with something raw. And I couldn't fix it. No matter how much money I made, no matter how hard I worked, I was still just a scared little girl holding my mother's hand and waiting for a miracle that never came. Jonas said nothing, because his story lived in the same house as his grief. Ariana's mother walked away, he finally admitted. One morning, she just decided she wanted a different life. I came home from work, and she and her things were gone. Clara's eyes shifted to him, really looked at him for the first time. I didn't get a goodbye, he continued. Just a note taped to the fridge. I stared at it for a long time. Then I picked up my daughter and promised her I'd be enough for the both of us. A heavy pause filled the room. Two souls bound by different kinds of loss. Yet the same aching loneliness, the sudden buzz shattered the silence. Clara's phone vibrated across the table. Her biggest client. Jonas watched panic wash across her face as she tried, and failed, to focus. Her hands were still trembling too much to type a coherent response. "It's an emergency deal," she whispered. "If I lose him, the board will destroy me." Without waiting for permission, Jonas picked up the phone. He read the messages in seconds, his tired brain slipping into the sharp mindset that had gone unrecognized at work for years. He crafted a calm, professional response. Clear, strategic, confident. The kind of communication Clara was known for, but couldn't manage tonight. He hit send. For long minutes, neither of them breathed. Then her phone buzzed again. Understood. "We'll proceed in the morning." "Thank you, Clara." Relief collapsed in her posture. She looked up at Jonas, stunned. "You just saved a six-figure account," she said quietly. He shrugged. "You do it every day. Tonight, it was just someone else's turn to hold it together." Something fractured in her expression, not in anger, but in realization. For the first time, Clara Hensley didn't look at him like an employee. She looked at him like a human being. "No one's ever done that for me before," she whispered. Jonas stood and grabbed his jacket. "You don't have to be alone all the time, you know." As he reached for the door, she spoke again, a raw, vulnerable sound barely above a breath. "Jonas, why are you being kind to me? After everything I've done to you." He paused. "Because I know what it's like to need kindness and find none," he said. "And I decided long ago my daughter would grow up in a world that had more of it." For a moment, Clara looked like the girl in the photograph again. Less powerful, more real, and somewhere, deep inside her carefully constructed walls, something began to stir. A fragile, unfamiliar warmth she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't a monster. She was a survivor. And Jonas had just walked straight into the guarded heart of the woman he thought he hated. Morning light spilled through Clara's apartment in thin, unfamiliar streaks, tracing the sharp lines of a place that had never known warmth. For once, she didn't wake with her usual rush of dread and control. There was no alarm blaring, no morning briefing echoing in her mind. Only a dull ache behind her eyes and the ghost of last night pulsing through her memory. The bar, the rain, Jonas at her door. She sat up slowly, the blanket draped around her shoulders, not her own. A glass of water rested on the nightstand beside two small aspirin. And somewhere in the quiet, the truth landed like a weight on her chest. "He saw me. And he stayed anyway." Clara pressed her palms to her face, the reality sinking deeper with every breath. She remembered the way she had spoken, the words she had buried for years, the photo of her mother, the phone in Jonas's hand, his steady presence while everything inside her had spun out of control, that a monster she had tried so hard to be. A shield sharpened into a sword. It had never truly protected her from anything. A knock sounded softly at the door. She tensed, then rose and opened it. Jonas stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes tired but gentle. He had clearly gone home at some point, yet he had returned without being asked. "I just wanted to check on you," he said quietly. "Make sure you were okay." For a moment, Clara couldn't speak. The words built up in her throat like a storm begging to break. "I remember everything," she said softly. His expression barely changed. I figured you would. I remember how cruel I've been. Every look, every dismissal, every time I made you feel small in front of others just because I needed to feel bigger than something. Her voice cracked, and I remember why I did it. Jonas said nothing, but his eyes never left hers. You had what I lost, she continued. A family, purpose, love. And instead of being brave enough to heal from my own grief, I punished you for reminding me of it. Tears finally slipped down her cheeks. Not the dramatic kind, but the honest, broken kind that come when pride has died. I'm sorry, Jonas. Not as your boss, as a person who failed you. The air felt different in that moment. Lighter, softer. He looked at her carefully, as though he were processing whether the woman before him was real or a part of last night's illusion. You hurt me, he admitted. But you also didn't know me, and I didn't know you. Pain makes strangers out of everyone. He exhaled slowly. I forgive you. The words hit her harder than any accusation ever could. Come to the office with me, she said suddenly, wiping her face as resolve filled her posture again. But this time, it wasn't cold. It was clear. There's something I need to do. In daylight. In front of everyone. Not behind closed doors. An hour later, the entire staff sat in stunned silence as Clara stood at the front of the conference room. Not the untouchable ice queen they knew, but a woman with bare truth in her eyes. Jonas Vale has been the most loyal and overlooked member of this team for 3 years, she announced. That ends today. Effective immediately, he is promoted to senior project manager with a salary increase that reflects what his dedication has always deserved. Murmurs spread across the room. Heads turned, eyes widened, and she added, her voice steady. His schedule will now accommodate his role as a single father. Flexibility is not a privilege, it is human decency. Jonas stood frozen, disbelief written across his face. She met his eyes, not as a superior, but as an equal. You taught me that strength isn't control, she said quietly. It's compassion. A sudden ringtone cut through the room. Jonas checked his phone, panic flickering across his features. It's the school, he said quickly. Ariana's sick. Clara didn't hesitate. Go, she said. I'll handle everything here. He paused. Are you sure? She nodded. That's what people who care do, right? For a brief second, something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude, respect, and maybe the first fragile hint of something more. Hey, Jonas turned and hurried out. The staff watched in confusion. But Clara's heart grew steadier with every step he took away. She wasn't losing control. She was finally gaining something far more valuable, her humanity. And outside, as Jonas rushed toward his car, a strange feeling followed him. Something he hadn't carried in years, the hope to be by the time he reached the driver's seat. His phone buzzed once more, a simple text. Clara, thank you for not giving up on me when I had already given up on myself. He stared at it for a moment, then smiled softly. The morning had changed everything, not because power had shifted, but because hearts finally had. Jonas's home was small, but it breathed. It hummed with fingerprints on the walls, crooked drawings taped to the fridge, and the faint scent of apple cinnamon that clung to the curtains long after Ariana and he had finished baking together. It was imperfect in the most beautiful way, the kind of place where life happened instead of being designed to impress. Clara hovered just inside the doorway, uncertain, as if she'd stepped into another world. You live here? She asked softly, glancing at the cluttered bookshelf, the mismatched throw pillows, the tiny shoes by the door. I know, Jonas said, almost smiling. Luxury, right? For a split second, a genuine laugh escaped her. It surprised them both. From the hallway, a tiny voice floated out. Daddy? Ariana padded into the living room, wrapped in her favorite blanket, curls slightly messy, eyes wide with curiosity. She stopped when she saw Clara and stepped closer to Jonas automatically. Who's that? She whispered, not quietly at all. Jonas crouched to her level. That's my boss, Clara. Ariana looked her up and down like a tiny judge in a pink unicorn pajama set. Oh, she said. The dragon lady. The air went still that Jonas's eyes widened in horror. Ariana, Clara blinked once. Twice. Then she laughed. Not a polite, quiet laugh. A real one that came from a place that hadn't existed in years. I suppose I earned that title, she said, bending slightly. Do I still look like a dragon? Ariana tilted her head thoughtfully. No, dragons are scarier. And you look sad. Clara swallowed. Well, maybe, she replied gently. You could help me learn how to be less scary. Ariana considered this very seriously. Then she reached out her small hand and offered it. Okay, but first you have to see my drawings. Jonas watched the exchange in silence, something cracking open in his chest as he realized Clara wasn't just standing in his living room. She was stepping into his world. And for the first time in a very long time, she wanted to belong somewhere. They sat at the tiny kitchen table, crayons scattered between them, as Ariana enthusiastically explained every color choice like it was art in a museum. Clara listened, truly listened, as if nothing in the world was more important. When Ariana accidentally colored outside the lines, she gasped, but Clara only smiled. Some of the most beautiful things in life happen outside the lines, she said softly. Jonas felt something twist inside him at her words. Later, after Ariana had curled up on the couch and fallen asleep, leaning against Clara's side, an act of trust that astounded him, the two of them sat in the quiet of the kitchen. The world outside felt far away. You built walls very high, Jonas said gently. So did you, she replied without accusation. He thought about that. His life had indeed become a series of boundaries. Wake up, work, care for Ariana, sleep. No risks, no attachments, no hope beyond survival. I was afraid if I wanted more, he admitted, I'd lose what little I still had. She nodded. I was afraid if I felt anything at all, I'd never survive it again. Silence lingered, but it was warm now. I'm tired of being afraid, she whispered. So am I. The office changed after that. Not in a sudden, dramatic way, but in small, merciful ones, like windows opening after years of stale air. Claire started saying good morning. She remembered birthdays. She insisted people go home to their families. Laughter returned, tentative at first, then bold. The staff stopped walking on eggshells and started standing taller. And Jonas finally exhaled, with Clara pushing him forward. Not with cold commands, but unwavering belief. His confidence bloomed. He presented ideas, led meetings. His creativity, buried for years under exhaustion, found voice again. One afternoon, she stood in his doorway, holding a thin stack of papers. You wrote this? She asked. He glanced up. It's just some notes. A few thoughts I've been putting together at night. It's a book, Jonas. He scoffed lightly. It's a mess. It's a story, she corrected. And it's powerful. A single father. Loss. Love. Healing. It's everything people need to remember still exists. His heart stumbled at her words. You should publish it, she said simply. And I know exactly who to call. For a moment, the roles of their lives overlapped. Boss and employee gone, reduced to two imperfect humans lifting each other forward. But the most important transformation didn't happen at work. IT happened in his living room. In shared dinners and quiet laughter. In whispered fears and brave truths. In the slow realization that love didn't always arrive like lightning or poetry. Sometimes it arrived gently, in the form of a woman once called Dragon Lady, now curled on the floor helping a little girl build castles made of pillows. In the form of a single father who had finally allowed himself to dream again. One evening, as Ariana slept peacefully in her room, Clara stood by Jonas on the balcony, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. You saved me that night, she said. No, he replied, turning to look at her. You saved yourself. I just happened to be there when you decided to. She hesitated, then reached for his hand. And what if I don't want to be alone ever again? She asked. He squeezed her fingers gently. Then don't be, he replied. Beneath the soft glow of a healing moon, two wounded hearts leaned closer, not out of need, but out of choice, out of friendship, out of hope, out of destiny waiting patiently for the moment they were finally brave enough to touch it. And inside, Ariana murmured in her sleep, smiling at a dream she couldn't yet understand, at a dream where dragons became family and broken hearts learned how to love again. 6 months later, The park looked nothing like the cold sidewalk where two broken lives had once almost collided. Golden leaves scattered across the grass. Children's laughter weaving through the air as afternoon sun filtered through the trees. Jonas sat on an old wooden bench, watching Ariana chase pigeons with wild, joyful determination. Her laughter was brighter now, lighter, as if the world had finally softened for her. Beside him sat Clara, in no longer in tailored power suits, just a simple dress, hair loose, face warm. She fit into the park the same way she now fit into his life. Easily, naturally, like she'd always belonged there. I used to think places like this were foolish, she admitted quietly. Slow, pointless. Still think that? He asked. She shook her head, eyes on Ariana. Now I think I just didn't have anyone worth sitting beside. He smiled at that. For a while they said nothing. Just watched the little girl who had unknowingly healed them both. Then Clara turned to him, her voice softer, trembling, but not in fear. I love you, Jonas. The words weren't dramatic. They weren't heavy. They were simple, honest. True, Daddy didn't flinch. He didn't hesitate. I think, he replied gently, I've loved you much longer than I allowed myself to admit. Tears welled in her eyes, but she laughed through them. The happiest kind of tears. 6 months had taken them from strangers to something that felt stronger than time itself. And still, the universe wasn't finished gifting them yet. 1 year later, the house was different. Not bigger, not fancier, but fuller. Clara's books rested on the shelves beside Jonas's. Ariana's drawings now framed the hallway like priceless art. Plants filled the windows. Music filled the kitchen. And warmth filled the spaces that grief once occupied. It was no longer his home. It was theirs. That evening, the three of them sat on the living room floor, Ariana building a castle larger than any she'd attempted before. Clara lay beside her, carefully placing the final tower, while Jonas watched, heart so full it almost hurt. Done. Ariana announced proudly. It's perfect, Clara said, just like our family. Ariana added cheerfully without even realizing the power of her words. Clara froze. Jonas's breath caught. Ariana looked up innocently. What? That's what it is. Clara slowly lifted her eyes to Jonas. There was a question in them. A hope so fragile it could shatter if left unanswered. He stood up and walked toward the window, pretending to adjust the curtains, while Clara watched him, confused. Then he turned around. In his hand was a small velvet box. Time stopped. Clara's hands flew to her mouth, eyes wide with shock. Jonas, she whispered. He kneeled in front of her, right there on the floor where their life had been rebuilt piece by piece. I once thought kindness was just a duty, he said. Something my grandmother taught me, to give while expecting nothing in return. He opened the box. Inside rested a simple, beautiful ring, not loud, not demanding. Just honest, just true. But loving you, he continued, showed me that kindness is something that returns to you in the form of miracles. You didn't just change my life, Clara. You became it. Tears streamed freely down her face now. Ariana already believes your family, he said softly, glancing at the little girl who nodded enthusiastically. And so do I. He reached for Clara's trembling hands. Will you officially become part of this family that already belongs to you? For a heartbeat, she couldn't speak. All the years of loneliness, power, pain, loss led to this one moment. Then she whispered the only answer that mattered. Yes. 1,000 times yes. Ariana cheered, throwing her arms around them both. And in that sacred little room, once filled with silence, now overflowing with love, a promise was made. Not just between two people, but between three hearts that had finally found their way home. Kindness had won, love had healed, and a broken night had turned into a forever morning. Sometimes, the most important moments don't arrive with music swelling in the background. They arrive as inconvenient calls at the worst possible time, broken people standing at your door, when you've every reason to turn them away, choices where holding on to anger feels easier than offering grace. But in those quiet, uncomfortable seconds, when the world is watching but you don't know it, you discover who you truly are. Because when you choose compassion over resentment, when you choose love over pride, when you choose kindness over everything that ever hurt you, you don't just save someone else. You save yourself. You heal wounds you didn't even realize were still bleeding. You open doors you thought were forever closed. And you create a future that once felt impossible. Somewhere behind the laughter of an innocent child and the trembling smile of a healed heart, a new life begins, not because of fate, not because of luck, but because, in one fragile moment, you chose to be kind. Final text. On screen, always answer the call of kindness. It might just change your life. Fade out, with Ariana's laughter echoing into silence.